Okay. Well, hi, Ellen.
Hey.
Thank you so much for coming and chatting with us. I'm super pumped to learn about all of this because my knowledge of hormones and health in this way and like managing your hormones and how they correlate to stress is just, out of my wheelhouse. I have fundamental knowledge from going to IIN and all that, but I'm always curious to learn more because I feel like it's a topic that we don't get deep enough into as women, as humans. Like there should just be more education that's accessible to us, I feel. And so I'm really glad that you're gonna share your knowledge with us today. Um, so fill us in on who you are and what you do, and we can introduce ourselves as well. I know that you and I know each other, but for everyone watching, I'm Kelly and the founder of Root to Rise. And I guess this is a members only event, so everyone knows each other. But why don't you introduce yourself formally, Ellen, and then you
Yeah,
can take it away.
absolutely. Do you mind if I share my screen? I have a
Please
little
do.
intro slide.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, let's see. Okay, let me present. There we go. Are you able to, do you see my little videos on the side or no?
No, just
Oh,
your slides.
wait, okay. I'm going to minimize that. All right. Hi. Thanks so much for having me, Kelly. I am really excited to share this with you. This is kind of a culmination of a bunch of things that I talk about in my 3-month program, kind of packed together into a digestible presentation for today. Oops, there we go. So as an introduction, hello, I'm Ellen. I am a holistic hormone coach, the owner of Elevated Health, which is a play on my name. I work with people who have hormonal cycles. I work with menstruators to help them find balance between their hormonal, mental, and gut health. This is something that is extremely personal and important to me. I've had in the past a lot of issues with all three of these things, and it took a long time for me, I'd say too long, to figure out that all my symptoms were connected. So my goal is to help educate other menstruators about how their bodies work and also give them a place to feel heard, because it's very common that we go to the doctor and express our concerns and don't feel heard and walk away kind of feeling dismissed and like there's something wrong with us. So yeah, I'm currently running a 90-day coaching program. It's called Hormonal Harmony. I do it every 3 months. And it really meshes research-backed information and education like this presentation, along with behavioral coaching to help my clients achieve their health goals and to learn more about their bodies. So this program is really perfect for just about anyone who's hoping to decrease PMS symptoms, their painful periods, irregular cycles, digestive issues, anxiety, depression, which may or may not be cyclical, or maybe they're coming off of birth control or thinking about it, or they just want to learn more about their bodies and have a more loving relationship with their bodies. So that is kind of what I'm promoting right now. The next one starts April 12th, which is really exciting. So today, this is a general outline of what we're going to go over today. For the sake of time, and because I know this is a recorded lecture as well, I'm just going to go through everything. If there are questions at the end, like let me know. And I'm also happy to connect offline. So we're going to start with the HPA axis. And if you don't know what that means, that's totally fine. I'll explain it. And before that, I'm going to kind of back up and give an overview of your autonomic nervous system in case you don't remember that from biology class. So your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight system, and your parasympathetic is your rest and digest system. And these two systems fall underneath as subsets of the autonomic nervous system, which really requires a balance between these two groups to work efficiently. And the relationship between our parasympathetic and sympathetic systems is determined by what we're passed down genetically from our parents, but also diet, stress, toxin exposure, exercise, sleep, and other things in our environment. So that's supposed to be a GIF, but stress from an evolutionary perspective is a good thing. That is, we need stress reactions for situations in which we may need to fight for our survival. Unfortunately, our body responds to the stress of fighting for our lives, such as like running away from a dinosaur in Jurassic Park, which is what this GIF was. It reacts the exact same way to that as it responds to stressors that we find in our modern day-to-day lives. So examples of these stressors might be like work stress, self-comparison on social media, hustle culture, which Kelly and I have talked about before, staying up late to finish a deadline, relationship stress, toxic relationships, drinking, living through a pandemic. Those are just some examples. So just thinking of those, many of us are always under some kind of stress. And when that's the case, our bodies aren't able to shift out of that sympathetic fight or flight mode like they would typically, like we're meant to after like running away from a momentary exposure to stress that then ends, such as running away from a dinosaur. So now that we have that covered, I want to talk about our main stress control system, which is your HPA, or hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So I'm going to break this down and talk about what each of the parts of this axis do. So your hypothalamus is in your brain. It's at the base of your brain, and it helps us maintain balance within many systems throughout our body. And it does this by secreting hormones, depending on what the other parts of the body tell the hypothalamus that they need. So through the regulation of these hormones, the hypothalamus has a really strong influence on all of these things: body temperature and sweating, thirst, appetite and weight control, emotions, sleep cycles, sex drive, immune response, blood pressure and heart rate, digestive juices, and more. Next, the pituitary gland is a teeny tiny little pea-sized gland that you can see on this picture that sits below the hypothalamus. And it also releases hormones, and these control other parts of the endocrine system. And the endocrine system is a collection of glands that produce hormones. So you have your thyroid gland, adrenal glands, ovaries, and testes are all part of the endocrine system. This is where, in people with uteruses, our cycle affecting hormones are produced. So FSH, LH, TSH, they're all produced there. And you can start to see how like having our HPA axis in balance would be really helpful for our menstrual cycle health as well. The hypothalamus, which we just talked about, can stimulate or inhibit, block the release of hormones from the pituitary gland. So in a way, the pituitary gland is kind of like a hormonal thermostat that the hypothalamus can turn up and down whenever it needs adjustment. That's how it should be working. Next, we have your adrenal glands, and I think this picture kind of looks like a hot pocket, which I've been told is disgusting, but it does, so whatever. Your two adrenal glands sit on top of each kidney. And within each adrenal gland, you have an outer adrenal cortex that produces certain hormones, including aldosterone and androgens like, estrogen and testosterone, and your main stress hormone, cortisol. That's super important. The other part of the adrenal gland is the inner adrenal medulla, that inner part, the filling of the hot pocket, if you will. This part secretes other hormones, including adrenaline and noradrenaline, also known as epinephrine and norepinephrine. And they work with cortisol to control your reaction to stress. The adrenal glands are controlled by the pituitary gland, which makes sense, as I just said, that the pituitary manages most of the endocrine system, and this is part of that endocrine system. So at a high level now, we kind of understand each of these parts, right? But like, how do they work together and affect our health? The HPA axis altogether, like all these combined, kind of, it refers to the feedback system that includes the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands. And by feedback system, I just mean that these parts of the body work off of each other, kind of like that thermostat that I said, to maintain balance or homeostasis within the body. So they communicate to say like, oh no, that's too much, or that's not enough, we need more. So the HPA axis connects the central nervous system to the endocrine system, and it acts as our main stress control system. So that said, it kind of seems like we should keep things in check, right? Seems pretty important. Okay, so a quick overview of how the HPA axis works when a stress occurs. So when we have some kind of stress occur, an experience of stress longer than a few minutes, we have neurons in the hypothalamus, and they release a hormone called CRF, or corticotropin releasing factor, CRF. You can see that on the picture on the right. The hypothalamus releases CRF on a 24-hour cycle, which affects our circadian rhythm. And I'll go over our circadian rhythm more. So the CRF in the hypothalamus then stimulates the pituitary gland to secrete a hormone called ACTH. And I always say this wrong, but I'm going to attempt it. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. It has a nickname for a reason. ACTH in the pituitary gland activates the adrenal glands to produce our stress hormone, cortisol. And then the hypothalamus and pituitary gland, because it's a feedback system, they then respond accordingly to the amount of cortisol that was released. So this is all pretty technical, I'm aware, and I'm throwing around like a ton of different names of hormones. But what you can really take away from this part of the discussion is that there's a ton going on in our bodies to keep us healthy and feeling good and trying to maintain low stress levels. And a lot of body parts and hormones are interacting with one another. So if something goes wrong, which could span from like having a benign tumor on your pituitary gland, which I know someone who that has happened to not having a good balance between work and the rest of your life, things can go haywire in many different parts of your body. So just a few more points on the HPA axis, and then I promise we will move on. So an important goal of the HPA axis is to increase cortisol in times of temporary stress. When cortisol is released by the adrenal glands, cortisol causes rises in glucose or sugar in the bloodstream by breaking down protein stores. So when I first learned that, I was like, why would it do that? And the answer is to be able to give us energy to create our fight or flight response when a stress happens. So it's kind of like eating a power bar before a run. And this is helpful in the short term, like if we're running from those dinosaurs, but you can see that if it is a chronic thing, constantly elevated blood sugar can occur, and that can lead to diabetes, hormonal imbalances, and that comes with symptoms like painful periods, PMS, irregular cycles, gut symptoms, and more. So we've been focusing on how the HPA axis works with us in times of stress, but it's also important to note that it also releases hormones kind of throughout the day on a normal basis. So this axis is at work during non-stressful times as well, just in less extreme amounts. Ideally, our cortisol and ACTH levels gently rise and fall throughout the day according to our circadian rhythms. And they're ideally highest mid-morning. So we get that kind of boost of energy in the morning, and then they're ideally lowest before we go to sleep so that we can actually go to sleep. You can tell when this is maybe effed up when you find it impossible to get out of bed in the morning and are kind of wired before going to sleep. Those are that's very common. You can get cortisol tests done, like saliva cortisol tests. Typically, that's done through several different times throughout the day to kind of track that like up and down. It's not very fun. You have to spit into a tube, but it's cool data on yourself. Another example of a hormone from the hypothalamus that rises and falls throughout the day is melatonin, which is released at night. And melatonin is also produced in the gut. Actually, I don't know exactly how much, maybe close to 50% is produced in the gut. And you're probably familiar with melatonin. A lot of people take melatonin pills to help them sleep. But starting with gut health is a great step if you're feeling like your melatonin levels might be off. All right, another GIF that doesn't work. So how does chronic stress and long-term activation of the HPA axis affect us? These are all probably pretty familiar. Maybe some of them are new, but symptoms of chronic stress can manifest as anxiety, depression, exhaustion, fatigue, burnout, that like tired but wired feeling, irregular menstrual cycles, lack of sex drive, sleep issues, high blood pressure, blood sugar imbalances, leading to diabetes if it gets that bad, digestive issues, and more. So what can we do? Like, we don't want any of that, right? So here are a few tips for starting to support your HPA axis. Consistency is key with all of this. If you've ever been to a yoga studio or a meditation class, you may notice that they refer to these as practices rather than, I don't know, yeah, practices. So it's something that you build off of. You don't master it and be done with it. You build your practice over time, and that's how you gain the powerful benefits of the practice. So meditation and mindfulness, I'll discuss that more in a little bit. That's a big one. Healthy sleep hygiene, which I'll also talk about more. Moderate exercise, just as we know that too little exercise can impact your health negatively, too much exercise can also cause stress on the body. And I work with my clients to increase their mindful awareness around the type of exercise that their body is craving at that time, and especially how your relationship to exercise naturally flows throughout your cycle. Herbal support. These are just a few examples of herbs that are great support for your HPA axis. Fenugreek, spearmint, and fennel seeds can help support the body's ability to produce 5-HTP, which is your precursor, or like it's the thing that comes before you create serotonin, your happy and relaxed hormone/neurotransmitter. And this may help with sleep and relaxation. Adaptogenic herbs, which you may have heard of before, like ashwagandha, holy basil, maca, and rhodiola. And anytime I talk about supplements, I do recommend you speaking to a doctor before starting anything. Adaptogens are typically not recommended for folks who are pregnant. And then supporting the gut through diet to improve the hormonal production of your good gut bacteria is a great place to start. Okay, so moving right along, we're going to talk about our circadian rhythms. So in addition to stressors, life is also affected and influenced by daily light changes due to the rotation of the Earth. You're probably familiar with the sun going up and down by this time in your life, but do you know how the body interacts with this cycle and how the changing light throughout the day affects us? So all types of organisms have circadian rhythms, not just people. For example, flowers open and close during certain times of the day. And as humans, our circadian rhythms help different systems in our body work in a 24-hour cycle in rhythm. We have a kind of master clock located in our hypothalamus. And throughout the day, certain genes send signals to the rest of the body to regulate activity. So examples of actions in our bodies that rely on these signals. We have our digestive system, which creates proteins and enzymes that match the typical timing of our meals to help us break them down. We have our endocrine system, which regulates hormones to suit normal energy expenditure and help us feel good and energized and then tired when we want to go to sleep. And then our metabolism and weight are affected by our circadian rhythms due to how this cycle impacts the regulation of blood sugar and cholesterol. So our circadian rhythms are very sensitive to light, and because of this, they are very tied to the day and night cycle. During the day, light exposure cues the master clock in our hypothalamus to send signals that generate alertness and help us keep awake and active. And as night comes, the master clock initiates the production of melatonin, like I mentioned, and keeps transmitting signals that help us stay asleep, ideally, throughout the night. So what causes us to have wonky circadian rhythms? Shift work is a big one, meaning people who work at night and attempt to sleep during the day. We also have artificial and electric lighting, which seems pretty obvious. For thousands of years, the sun was our only source of light, but this changed with the invention of electric lighting, which of course is awesome, we love it. But electric lighting has disrupted our dependence on the day-night cycles of the sun and is also thus changed our sleep-wake cycles. Along with this, screens in general definitely affect our circadian rhythms. Lack of exposure to sunlight, sleep deprivation, stress, pain, jet lag, and then alcohol and caffeine are big offenders for our circadian rhythms. And then because when all that happens, what are the health implications? So we experience changes in metabolism and imbalances in our hormones that regulate hunger and feeling satisfied after a meal. So this may lead to unwanted weight changes or maybe surprising weight changes, increases in impulsivity, and kind of changes in how you're thinking and making decisions. Increases in heart rate and blood pressure related concerns, mood disorders like anxiety, depression, and more, increases in cortisol levels and stress, sleep issues, obviously, and then hormone and blood sugar dysregulation. So sleep deprivation alters the HPA axis, and then an altered HPA axis negatively affects sleep, which sucks. So that kind of leads to this awful vicious cycle of stress and sleep loss that a lot of people suffer from. But there are things that we can do to support our circadian rhythms, along with everything that I explained about the HPA axis. So to support your circadian rhythm, you can support your internal clock by going to sleep and waking up at the same time every day as much as possible, even on the weekends. A lot of us, at least for me, it's shifted during pandemic times, but a lot of people, myself included before, our weekend time, like going to sleep and waking up time, is like several hours different than throughout the week. So if you think about that, you're kind of starting every Monday with jet lag, and that's not a great way to start your start your week. So along with this, trying to have your meals at around the same time per day is super helpful for your body to stay on track, and so that it knows when to produce those really helpful enzymes that are helping break down your food. Limit light while sleeping by using blackout curtains, eye masks, etc. I found a super ugly one at Target, but I use it every night for my windows, and it really helps. Limiting noise while sleeping by using a noise machine. I really like Dome. I have one of those. Decreasing alcohol and caffeine, especially, caffeine in the afternoon, especially. In terms of alcohol, even low levels of alcohol, so fewer than just one serving a day for women, was found to decrease sleep quality by 9.3% in women in a 2018 Finnish sleep study with 4,100 subjects. So that's pretty large. And then moderate amounts, so that's just one serving, decreased quality in this group by 24%. So something to think about if you have a nightly drink and you have sleep issues, might just be something to think about. Avoiding screen exposure during before bed. I personally use an app called Flux to help my tint on my screen decrease as the sun sets. So it kind of becomes more yellow. That's awesome. And then I try to shut down all screens 1 to 2 hours before bed, which may be a really hard transition for some people, but doing this and replacing late night TV or Instagramming with a calming non-screen activity like reading, writing in a journal, meditating, stretching, cuddling with a partner or a pet can be a game changer for your circadian rhythm and sleep hygiene. And then trying to expose yourself to natural light throughout the day and right at wake up. So for people who have a hard time waking up in the morning, this may be really helpful for you to train your circadian rhythm by waking up at the same time every day and exposing yourself to sunlight as soon as possible after wake up. This hopefully would help your master clock adjust. And if you don't have sunlight, hello, Chicago, where I am, you can use a full spectrum light box. You could try that. And also if you drink caffeine, try to drink that at the same time when you wake up as you're seeing the sunlight to help your cortisol rhythm adjust. And then during the winter, when things are really dark, like I said, light therapy is great. I really have benefited from that. Okay. Lastly, let's talk about mindfulness. So when you hear the word mindfulness, you may think of just meditation or maybe yoga. And while these are very popular types of mindful exercises, mindfulness itself is more of a state of being that can be accessed when we're doing any activity. So Jon Kabat-Zinn is known as the father of modern mindfulness. I really like this picture of him. In the late 1970s, he created the first 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR course at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. And it was created for patients with chronic pain. And these courses are now taught all over. And I actually completed one myself here in Chicago as a way just to deepen my mindfulness practice. My parents did one in North Carolina. They really are taught all over. You can, I think some are done online now because of COVID. So you can Google MBSR near you. I absolutely recommend looking into it if you're interested. It's a pretty intense, like you end up meditating for up to like 30 to 45 minutes a day. It's really cool. It's a very deep practice. And MBSR was designed to harness the fundamentals of mindfulness meditation as taught by the Buddha, but with the Buddhism taken out of it. So when asked what mindfulness is, Jon said in an interview that mindfulness is awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. So how does mindfulness affect our mental health? There's a study about mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and it's been shown to be at least as effective as antidepressants, which is pretty cool. In one research study, they demonstrated that ongoing meditation has the potential to influence neurotransmitters, including serotonin, increasing serotonin, dopamine, GABA, melatonin, and then decreasing cortisol and norepinephrine. So that's great for helping your stress response. And a ton of neurotransmitters are produced in our gut. So I mentioned serotonin earlier, and 90 to 95% of serotonin and more than half of your dopamine, both very important for our happiness and relaxation and kind of peace of mind, they're both produced in the gut, along with the brain, but 95% of serotonin, that's huge. So mindfulness tools such as meditation, yoga, or other relaxation techniques can basically retrain or rewire your sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous systems And they may also help your digestive health. Our gut and our brain have this really beautiful communication and connection. So when we work on our gut, we work on our brain, and when we work on our brain, we work on our gut. It's pretty amazing. And that's something I go into a lot more detail in my coaching program. All right. So this is really cool. I think you can read this. I want to go over the stress activation cycle that is taught in the MBSR courses. So this is a diagram that is used in Jon Kabat-Zinn's books. So we have first, where the little arrow is pointing, are different types of stressors. So we have first external stressors that can include biological, environmental toxins, physical injury, social stress, class or societal stress, political stress, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, and relationship stress. And then internal stress events are how the mind changes in reaction to a perception of threat from other outer forces. So this threat creates energy and the release of cortisol, which causes biological changes such as increased heart rate, increased breathing rate, pupil dilation, and increased sweating. And that is that fight or flight / sympathetic nervous system kicking in. So when we have our stress event, an alarm goes off in our body. It arouses the central nervous system, and our body's defenses are put into action. These defenses are fight, flight, freeze, or faint. And this stress reaction triggers our hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenals, that HPA axis, to go into action, increasing our blood pressure and heart rate. So when this happens chronically over and over again, when we're constantly in this alarm state, this is when we begin to internalize the stress response and to see side effects of the stress in our bodies. I've mentioned these already, but it could be high blood pressure, feeling tired but wired, heart arrhythmias, sleep disorders, chronic headaches and backaches, anxiety, and more. The next, and then unfortunately, this is when self-destructive, kind of maladaptive coping mechanisms come in for a lot of us to try to deal with these symptoms. So this could be overworking, hyperactivity, eating disorders, substance dependency, smoking, overuse of caffeine or alcohol, gambling or other addictive behaviors, and more. And then the next stage of this cycle is the breakdown. So this is both physically and psychologically. In this stage, you feel exhausted. You feel fatigued, burnt out, and are left without drive or enthusiasm for life. Depression is really common, along with, in more extreme cases, heart attacks and cancer. So I have a little activity that can be done live and at home. So thinking about this cycle, I just want to ask you a couple questions, give you some time to think about it, so you can write a note on your computer or get a little pen and paper and jot down your answers. So I'm going to read all these to you and then just give like a minute. So what are some of your own personal external stress triggers? This could include noise. For me, I'm very sensitive to noise, like noisy neighbors, someone tapping their pencil next to me. It creates this awful, anxious feeling in me. Politics, traffic, work, other pet peeves, like I just said. So what sets you off? Then what are your internal stress triggers? In other words, what, when you feel it internally, increases your stress levels? Examples of this could be feeling isolated, not feeling rested, not getting exercise. For me, because I have a history of digestive issues that was pretty chronic, when I feel those starting to pop up, that definitely triggers anxiety in me, and it kind of sets me off into this delightful spiral. So think about that. And then how do you currently deal with those triggers at this time in your life? And this could be positive or negative, whatever you consider positive or negative. So for example, eating, sleeping, cleaning, shopping, exercising, making art, calling friends, isolating yourself, shutting down, etc. And what are your patterns of escape? Fight, flight, freeze, or faint? So for me, when I get stressed about schoolwork, I used to flee, as in when I felt like it was too hard, I would distract myself by pulling something up on my phone or working on something else entirely, maybe like cleaning my entire apartment, or I've reorganized my entire apartment before instead of facing the challenge. So can you think of any patterns in your own life like this when you encounter stress? Examples of fight could be getting really angry when someone cuts you off in traffic, like road rage. An example of freeze could manifest as feeling extremely like indecisive or unable to do something when stressed. And then faint is a little bit trickier. I was trying to come up with an example. I guess it could be literal, like going to sleep when you're stressed, and then very extreme cases of like blacking out. We know that does happen in trauma cases. So just take a few moments, jot things down or think about it, and I will wait and drink some water.
I feel like for me, my biggest thing, like the first thing that came to mind was in the morning, every morning, I feel like it's every morning, the freaking garbage truck outside my window wakes me up and it drives me insane. And I feel like it's just so unhealthy to wake up to that jarring, disruptive noise. Oh my God. And it's so funny. My friend Jackie stayed over last night and she was like, that garbage truck, huh? And I was like, it's the number one issue in my life. Like this sound pollution of every morning, this freaking garbage truck. So what would your advice be? Just breathe through it.
I'll get to
I try to do.
I do think I have a real sensitivity to noise, and I have a new neighbor over here, and we have really thin walls, and her alarm goes off. I wake up really early. Her alarm goes off from 6 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. every day.
Oh my God. No.
I don't know how that's physically possible, but I'm like, okay, I was really, I guess, I don't know, triggered is like a strong word, but it really set something off in me.
Yeah.
Because there hadn't been a neighbor there before. And then I was like, okay, I have to live with this. So I turned up my noise machine, but then also trying to bring in some mindful awareness. I try to reframe it as much as possible. And if I bring empathy into it for myself, that is helpful for me of like, I'm probably noisy at other times of the day. That probably bothers her. And so reframing is a really helpful tool for me.
Yeah.
Breathing through it. Yeah. Meditation, I think, is a really powerful practice, especially when I did my MBSR course, we did it in a classroom at a gym, and there was a ping pong table right outside the room. And when we would be trying to meditate and the ping pongs would be going, and I'm like, okay, this is so distracting. I can't handle this. But the teacher was like, I agree, it's very annoying, but this is great training for everyday life.
Yeah.
Because being able to breathe through it, to focus on your breath, and every time that your brain pulls you back to that sound, reconnect it. Yeah. And that can happen 100 times. and it's going to be still beneficial for you, no matter how many times you just bring it back to the breath. That'd be my first example. I mean, unfortunately, you can't probably talk to your garbage man. Yeah. Probably talk to her.
Yeah. No, that is an important, just saying this to you, like, I know that, and it is an important reminder to be like, okay, you don't need to allow that spike to happen. Like you can just recenter and come back to the breath. And it is, I think, a lesson in letting go of things that are not in our control and to, recenter. Yeah.
It's definitely hard. Yeah, any other examples? Move on.
A big one for me is I used to have a lot of digestive issues as well. And I feel as though in the last maybe 2 years, they've really like eased out. But if things like bloating or like just if it starts to come back, I can feel my whole body just like break down in stress because I'm like, is it like, what am I doing wrong? Is it coming back? What am I doing differently? Like, because I never really knew. It's not like one thing, changed it. It was like a lot of things changed it. So when they start coming back, I definitely feel everything in my body sort of resist and question.
I empathize with that so much because, yeah, exact same with me. And so just talking to a client about this, it's a very common, it's a traumatic response, right? Because you dealt with something really awful and you don't necessarily know what helped it get better. I bet managing your stress had a lot to do with it. And so when it comes back up, your brain is immediately like, oh God, I don't want that to happen again. I got through that. So what I try to do is you can create mantras. I try to tell myself like, I am safe. My body is doing everything it can do to keep me safe and to keep me healthy. Our bodies have really strong, good intentions. And sometimes those intentions result in things that don't make us feel good, unfortunately. So the more that we can work with our body and tell it that like, I'm working with you, I know that we can feel better versus putting the blame on your body and saying like, you're my enemy, which is kind of how I felt for a long time. I think is really powerful. And then I tell myself like nothing is permanent. Even the times when I have had like longer flares, it isn't permanent. So I try to remind myself that too.
I'd love to ask you as well, because I've been feeling that cycle, and you mentioned it, where it's like you're not sleeping enough, and then you're tired, but then you're like too tired to fall. It's like that kind of burnout of like tired but still wired. And I know that part of it has to do, I think, with just not waking up consistently at the same time and like spending the night at a boyfriend's, and that changes everything. And then coming back and like trying to get your sleep back on track. But I also feel as though some of it is having to do with my period cycle, which seems like and I'm having some issues with my IUD, so like seems out of whack. And it just feels like there's so much information and I don't know which one to tackle first. Like, I'm like, can I blame my hormones, or is it the sleep, or is it do you have any like kind of quick advice for that? Because it's all in stress and it's all in hormones.
I think the way I think about it is like, rarely is it one thing, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately with birth control, it affects everybody differently. I was on the pill for 7 years, and it was the one thing that throughout all my like health issues and took a million tests and whatever, it was the one thing that I didn't try to remove to see if that would help. And someone finally suggested that, and my depression improved significantly. I'm not saying that that's the case for everybody. It did help me a lot. I think for me, I just wanted to see what my body was even like, not on a medication that was controlling my hormones. So that's one thing, I guess, to explore if that's within your interests. But in terms of cyclically, I think it's really interesting to start tracking those things to see, I don't know if you have a period tracking app, but to start tracking when those periods of, no pun intended, like when the times of not sleeping well comes up, to see if it is happening on a cyclical cycle. Is it happening during PMS? Is it happening during your period? And just to see, because then if we start to put the pieces together that something is happening cyclically, that could point towards more of a hormonal thing in terms of your cycle hormones.
Yeah.
So just starting to take that data, I think it's the same thing with digestive issues. Like a lot of people's poop changes throughout their cycle. PMS tends to, or your luteal phase, so before you get your period, tends to be more constipation heavy or it just slows down because your progesterone is higher. And that causes that's a relaxing hormone. And that also relaxes your gut muscles. So they're just not moving things through as quickly. Versus on your period, we have prostaglandins, which are these fun inflammatory things that like cause everything to contract. And that's why we get really bad cramps sometimes. And working on decreasing inflammation, super helpful for that. Decreasing those prostaglandins, or decreasing foods like dairy can help people, and high histamine foods. So like wine, alcohol in general, like that would help a lot probably on your period. That can help decrease the inflammation in those prostaglandins. And also when your uterus is contracting to expel your period, it's also contracting your gut muscles, which makes people have period poops, which is super fun. Diarrhea during a period. Doesn't happen to everybody, but it's common enough that it has a name. Cool. So I'm gonna move on. Oops. Okay, so when we insert mindfulness into this cycle, most likely there's still going to be arousal within our HPA axis because that's just how life works. But more importantly, what we want to do is with mindfulness, we bring in a non-judgmental awareness of the body. That's kind of what we were just talking about. So we begin to notice when our muscles become tense during a time of stress. I definitely hold my stress in my stomach. So I'll notice that like I'm working on something and I'm like, oh wow, I've been like flexing my abs this entire time and like barely breathing. So every time I notice that, I just reset, just take a breath. And it like just like with meditation, you may do it a million times and that's totally okay. Eventually your body hopefully will, you'll train yourself, right, to that be more of an immediate response. Other people hold stress in their jaw, their head. That one's a little harder to relax, but meditation can help with that. Their neck or their shoulders, you know, like this. Yeah, there's a lot. So let's see. We also begin to gain awareness of the full context of the situation. So we can think about the stressor in the context of our lives. And like I was saying about reframing, we can kindly reframe the experience. So the truth is that when we have something stressful going on, like a breakup or a pending move or like a pandemic, often we try to distract ourselves with other thoughts, but our minds are always going to bring us back to whatever is stressing us out. So instead of distracting, we can try reframing. And in terms of an example for quarantine or the pandemic, I would recommend, like, I think this was more intense at the beginning, for at least for me, but can we think of any advantages to staying home? Like how your life may have improved in some ways, even just one, maybe spending more time with your family or yourself, learning more about yourself, picking up a new hobby or working on your health, sleeping more. That's been a big one for me. And with this strategy, we're not really trying to change anything about the situation, but rather see things from a different perspective. And with all of this, we can experience a quicker recovery of mental balance and calmness after a stressful situation. So we begin to break those stress reaction habits that have been ingrained in us for a really, really long time. And those maladaptive coping mechanisms have been there to protect us. We drink when we're stressed because it's the only way maybe we know how to calm down. So when we start bringing in more mindful awareness and start recognizing those triggers and those habits, that's when we're able to make a shift to something that's maybe a little bit healthier and suits our goals. Okay, so I'm gonna go through this quickly because we're running out of time, and also I'm pretty sure y'all are pretty familiar with meditation. But this is a picture from Headspace. It's my favorite meditation app. Totally recommend checking it out. So I think meditation can be really intimidating for some people, especially if you think like my mind needs to just go blank, which especially for people who have minds that go like go, 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 that's like an impossible thing to even think about. And ironically, those are the people who probably need it the most. So at its simplest, it's the act of sitting or lying down and being present with your breath and all of the sensations of your body, and just being really curious about how you feel, about anything that you feel, any pain, any discomfort, but not judging, and just noticing and being present with your breath. There's different types of meditation. We have guided imagery. I really like Insight Timer for those. I think that's great for people who are more visual. With body scans, controlled breathing. So instead of just being present with your breath, you're literally breathing in a certain rhythm, and that can just be more appealing to some folks and more helpful. There's an app called Awesome Breathing that I like that does that. Let's see. Mindful walking. It's not super nice out right now, but I like doing this during the summer. Like literally walk, maybe take a different route than you normally do, without headphones, and just notice things around you. Try to find joy in small things. And these are all really cheap or free things that you can do to just improve or work on mindfulness in your life. You can also use the same thing, like if you could do a mindful shower. Our brains go elsewhere, but if we say, hey, I'm going to just focus on what it feels like to take a shower. What does it feel like to shampoo my hair and have warm water on me? This is just another example of bringing mindfulness into your life. And then mindful eating is something I work with my clients a lot on. I won't read this quote, but because it's kind of long, but just being present with your meal and limiting distractions, because we all like to multitask and watch Netflix and be on our phone and eat at the same time. And all of a sudden we've eaten our entire meal without even remembering it. And like, God knows if we chewed or not. So doing our bodies a favor and doing ourselves a favor by recognizing and being grateful for the meal that we prepared for ourselves, or wherever we are, whoever prepared it, and being present with it. I'll share some books that are really helpful for this as well. Okay, so do we need mindfulness every day, or can it just be for when we don't feel good? A lot of people meditate when they're stressed and then it drops off. I'm totally guilty of that. And Jon Kabat-Zinn has famously compared one's mindfulness practice to weaving together a parachute. So if you only use it when it's needed during hard times, when you're feeling badly, that's similar to starting to weave the parachute right before you have to jump out of a plane. So instead, we need to be weaving the parachute continuously so that when the day comes that we need the parachute, it's going to hold us. And I think that's a great analogy. Okay, so that's a lot of information that I shared today. As a recap, all of my tips for support in these different areas are interconnected, luckily. So you don't need to do a million new things. It all kind of comes down to a few recommendations. So when we work on our sleep hygiene, when we limit screen time, when we decrease our alcohol and caffeine intake, get more sunlight, and strengthen our mindfulness practices, this supports our HPA axis, this supports circadian rhythms, and decreases stress and anxiety. It's also great for exercise, going to therapy, trying new hobbies, bringing more fun into your life, not just focusing on work all the time, and really genuinely thinking what can I do to play more? That was actually my 2021 intention, is to bring more play into my life. Leaning on our support systems, eating well, supporting your gut. This can all do wonders for our stress levels, and managed stress levels are crucial for a healthy gut and a healthy hormonal cycle. So that's basically it. I wanted to share a few of my favorite books on this subject. Burnout, I actually haven't read this yet, so I will admit that. But it's been recommended to me a million times, and I listened to a great interview with both of their sisters who wrote it. And they have a great interview with Brene Brown on the book. If you want to check out, it's on Brene Brown's podcast, Unlocking Us. But I'm really excited to read that one, just about ending the stress cycle. I know we only have 1 minute, but I had a really great example of this. I had a falling out with a friend, right? And this caused me so much stress, this back and forth of like anxiety and not knowing what the other person was thinking and blah, blah, blah. And then we had a long conversation about it. I said what I needed to say. I set boundaries. And then I cried and took a shower, and I felt the stress fall out of me. And it felt, they talk about this, the stress cycle, like we talked about, and how to end it, and how it's really important to make specific things that like, or choices that end the stress cycle so that you can, and I could literally feel it like leaving my body. And then some mindful eating. The Mind Gut Connection is an amazing, really, really awesome book. Highly recommend. And that's it. There's me again. So I'd love for y'all to connect with me. I also would be happy to share 10% off all of my coaching services for the next 3 months to y'all. If you could just mention where you found me when we chat through MMC. And yeah, that's it. Wow, perfect timing.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was so informative. Damn. So much goodness in here. And I think that your entire approach is just so accessible, and there is so much science and research behind this, but digestible, pun intended. Yeah. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you. This was great.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to hear what people think.
Yeah.